Cloud panel. Welcome. I'm Kathy Villani from Leidos, and the Cloud panel is going to be moderated by John Hale, the Chief of the Cloud Directorate.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. There we go. So for those people who have not ever heard me talk, I actually don't need a mic, but I'll use one for everybody's edification. So today we're going to do a panel on cloud. This is a little different for us. A lot of times you hear a lot of these folks speak individually about their given areas, but with where we're at within the department today, we wanted to do a panel to kind of touch on a little bit on everything. So we've got kind of all facets of cloud and cloud implementation within the department up here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have everybody go through and introduce themselves and where they fit into the larger cloud system within the department. And then we'll go into some questions, and then we'll finish up with some questions from the audience. So before I do that real quick, I want to set the groundwork. If maybe this will work. Okay, so this is the one slide for this brief. Okay, so this is just to set some groundwork about what we're talking about when we use certain terms. So number one, when we talk about cloud within the department, you can't get away from traditional compute. Okay, so when we talk about cloud, we're really talking about compute and storage overall. So at the top of the slide, at the end of the day, we're still going to have traditional DoD data centers running traditional compute for our mission workloads, right? There's certain workloads within the department that either can't be moved to the cloud, or what we see more often than not, there's no money in the budget to modernize the applications to move them into that model, right? So at the end of the day, there's still traditional DoD data centers with traditional workload running in those. You'll hear us talk about on-prem cloud, right? So we talk about MilCloud 1 and MilCloud 2. There are other cloud initiatives within the department about on-premise cloud solutions. And you heard the director talk about that yesterday in the opening remarks. On-prem cloud is really designed for that mission-critical workload where we want the data to stay within our boundaries. Okay? And then we'll talk a lot today about off-prem commercial cloud. And that's where we see a lot of workload within the department going, is leveraging infrastructure as a service, but actually where we see more and more push is towards software as a service from the outside world, where you're just simply buying per-seat licenses and not necessarily capacity, right? And so we'll talk about it in this framework, and I just wanted everybody to understand where we're at. So if you take anything away, understand that there's no one-size-fits-all in the world of cloud from the department perspective. Everything has to work together in order for us to complete our mission. And we view each part equally valuable. Okay? So with that said, I'll start with the panel. And the panel members are set up here in a particular order on purpose. And so we'll start at the far end with Mr. Rice. I'll let Mr. Rice introduce himself and where he fits into the larger system. So,
hi, good morning. Can you hear? This is Ron Rice. I'm the principal author of the Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide, which is the document that we use to assess cloud providers for handling DoD missions, the commercial providers, and also specify some requirements that the DoD mission owners using cloud services have to meet when using cloud.
Charlie?
Good morning. My name is Charlie Griggs. I'm with the DISA Cloud Assessment Team. Where I fit into the picture is we assess the commercial cloud service providers' offerings. We work in conjunction also with the FedRAMP team, assessing FedRAMP offerings, cloud offerings. And we also, we are the office that provides the provision authorization for government PA offerings.
Good morning. My name is Susan Casson, and I think it's working. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Susan Casson, and I'm the program manager for Secure Cloud Computing Architecture, the SECA. So you may not have heard of it, but if I bet you've heard of the CAP, the Cloud Access Point, and the CAP falls under the SECA.
Good morning. My name is Dave Nameroff, and after all these three guys get done with all their work, I'm the guy that has to figure out how to make it work on a day-to-day basis to provide security services for folks that are in the cloud. I'm the cybersecurity service portfolio manager at DISA. Cloud is one of the things that we are working to understand how to make sure we can protect DoD data and DoD access to applications in the cloud.
So thanks, everybody. So I'm going to start with a pretty simple question for the panel. So one of the things the department gets hit on the most is our slow adoption of cloud, right? And so the first question to the panel, and I'm going to start down at the end with Mr. Rice, is what is your view of the key inhibitors within the department on cloud adoption and where that fits into your particular areas? So,
well, one of the biggest things that I see is not the antiquated, but the data center focused and network focused DoD policies. We have no real policy for cloud other than what we're trying to do in the cloud SRG to modify those policies to a degree. The other issue I see is the cybersecurity side. The cybersecurity providers are not prepared for cloud, commercial cloud, and it's pretty much an unfunded mandate to go to cloud, and everybody's trying to figure out how without any money and staff and so forth. So,
Charlie?
It's a very good question, John. I have several areas. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to talk through all of them, but a lot of feedback we get from the industry and from the community is the issues of documentation processing. Documentation processing carries a lot of weight in our business because it's one thing to say you want to do an assessment, but it's another thing to have all the moving parts in place. So documentation processing is a big issue for us. And of course, we have the other areas and the expectations. What we expect from the CSP on the government side and what they expect from us. The expectations, we need to mirror those or map them or have some sort of sweet spot where we and industry can work together moving forward. And that also involves that culture change because of the way we think about things and how we do things on the DoD side versus what they do on the industry side. And of course, another big area is streamlining our assessment processes. And we get a lot of comments and talk and noise about, oh, it takes too long to do an assessment. Oh, Mr. Griggs, why do we have to do A, B, C? So those are several areas that I think we really need to focus on that in order to move forward a lot more efficiently and quickly in the cloud business.
So I think one of the challenges we have. I think one of the challenges we have is the lack of security tools or services to protect the application once you move it to the cloud. So what I mean by that is when you have an application that's hosted within a DEC or a DoD data center, as part of that hosting, you get a DEC security stack, or you also get a management plane, management network, as well as a set of managed services that comes with the DEC offering to protect your application. So when you move your application out from that DEC environment into a cloud, especially in an IaaS, infrastructure as a service, you lose that, right? So by the definition of IaaS is infrastructure, so the CSPs are responsible to provide you the server and storage to host your application, but then the mission owners are responsible to provide any services on top of that. So I think due to the lack of these services, security services, the mission owners are then forced to have to figure something out on their own, which by itself could be costly and also time consuming. And I think that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen a lot or a large number of DoD applications moving to the cloud.
Wow, you guys are a tough act to follow. So I have to go to a fundamental problem, and I'm going to echo Charlie Griggs on this. It's a combination of cultural issues and policy issues. The problem is that the assumptions that we have used for years and years in DoD assume that computing and IT is implemented and protected in a certain mechanism. We spend a lot of time doing things like protecting at the network boundary, protecting at the at endpoint, and cloud, especially when I get to SaaS, brings a whole new perspective, because now I have to focus not on the infrastructure itself, not on the boxes, but now I have to focus on how do I protect the data, how do I protect the access. And while we've spent time talking about in DoD, what does it mean to have access management with CAT cards and two-factor authentication, things like that, we haven't really spent enough time talking about and understanding how do I control who's accessing what data and what they're doing with that data. And the industry is innovating in a lot of these areas to sort of help this problem, because the good news is DoD is not the only one with this sort of cultural assumption bias. A lot of the industry, a lot of the world is in the same sort of, we have a perimeter, we block things at the perimeter, and we got firewalls and IDSs at the perimeter, and we protect what's on the inside with that perimeter. The cloud, amongst other things, we lost that perimeter, and now we have to go back and rethink how do we do that. Infrastructure as a service, not such a big problem. We get to do a lot of some of the same things that we've been doing. When I get to platform and software as a service, and oh, by the way, all those other things don't fit into those three categories. I really have to rethink what it means to protect data, protect access, understand how data is being used, shared, et cetera.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so now we've talked about the problems, right? So I think the next thing we need to really talk about is what are we doing to address those problems, and where do we see that going in the near term efforts. So actually on this side, let's start with Dave this time.
Oh, I guess I get to go first this time. So as the Cloud Security Services portfolio manager, we've had a challenge on how do I take the current existing, what used to be called CNDSP Tier 2, now called CSSP, Cybersecurity Service Providers, under the DoD Instruction 8530. How do I take the approaches that we've used and we've been building and perfecting for 15 years now, and apply it to basically a completely new scenario where as I said before, I don't control the boundaries. I don't even necessarily have a boundary, especially when I get to SaaS and PaaS conditions. So we've just introduced a cloud security service provider service offering, and we're working with the CSPs, most notably Microsoft and Amazon, understand what they already have available, what you already get from efforts like FedRAMP and Cloud Security Alliance and other efforts that have been ongoing. How do we take advantage of those and mesh that with what we already know how to do well in order to better provide that? So we've been talking to people looking at Cloud Access and Security Broker products, Cisco Cloud Lock, Symantec, and don't take these as product endorsements, by the way. They're just examples. Symantec Cloud SOC, some other things like that, where they've looked at the higher level things. We focused on what's happening in the network, what's happening in the hardware, what's happening in the operating system. They're looking at how do I take advantage of system logs and user logs and application logs, things that for a long time we never trusted because we said, well, if the host gets rooted, we can't trust what the host is telling us. Now they've innovated so that I have different ways of doing that separating that so that one host being compromised doesn't mean everything on that host is compromised. And learning how to take advantage of that and building it into, we're working on building that into security services that we can then turn around and offer to DoD as a whole.
So as I mentioned before, one of the challenges is the lack of security services, right? So DISA developed what we call the SECA, the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture, to specifically address that. So SECA is a set of enterprise security services that we provide for the DoD to help our mission owners not only to move the application to the cloud, but also to protect that application in the cloud. So SECA has 4 components to it. The first is the cloud access point. And the cloud access point, the CAP, really is there to provide dedicated transport from the DISA to the cloud, and also to protect the DISA from the cloud. And then you have the 3 components of SECA, which is the VDSS, the VDMS, and the TCCM, and they're designed to protect the applications within that cloud environment. So the VDSS stands for the Virtual Data Center Security Stack, and if you imagine the cloud environment as a remote DoD data center, a DEC, right? So the VDSS would be equivalent to your DEC security stack. So it provides the application defense for your application that sits within that environment. The next piece is the VDMS, which is the Virtual Data Center Managed Services. So this is essentially your management network. And it also provides you a set of managed services to include HBSS ACAS, identity management, patching, all that good stuff. The third piece to this is called the TCCM, and this is a Trusted Cloud Credential Manager. So this is a governance model to ensure or to enforce least privileged access and role-based access control for your environment. So we designed the SECA in a fashion that is decoupled and modular because our goal really is to help our mission owners to move their applications to the clouds quickly as possible, and also to satisfy the security requirements so they can get their ATO and move their application to operations.
So quick question, Susan. So if you're level 4 and above data,
Yes.
right? And you leverage off-prem commercial cloud solutions, your data path must go through the CAP, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
But the SECA, these are optional services that mission
Correct.
partners can leverage. They could roll their own if they wanted to.
Absolutely, and that's why they're decoupled and modular, right? According to the requirement from the SRG, which Ron will talk about later, so CAP is absolutely a requirement for any level 4 and 5 data to connect to the commercial cloud off-prem. But the other 3 services, the VDSS, VDMS, and the TCCM are optional in a way that if you're a mission owner and you have some sort of the security services built in already to your application, you're more than welcome to use that. And we're here to provide you whatever you need on top of what you already have to get your ATO, to get your application to operations.
Okay. Charlie?
So what are we doing to address some of these issues? I'm going to briefly talk about these 3 areas at a very high level. I want to get down to the weeds with you. But on documentation processing, we know that the cloud service providers, whenever they come to us with their particular offerings and looking for their assessment that would eventually lead to the provision authorization process, we know that one of the big things they inquire about is what is it that you guys, government, need from us, or what is it that you want? What type of documentation, guidance, or templates that you have out there that we could use? And that's a very good question because it helps that expectation process. So what we've done is we've started to place a certain guidance documents out on the DISA, the isc.disa.mil site, and it's public accessible, where a cloud service provider can go out there and pull certain documents, such as the readiness assessment review, the readiness assessment review template, the SSP security system plan addendum for level 4 or level 5, the SSP documentation checklist. They can go out there and at least get started by pulling that document in and begin to work on those preliminary processes that would help them lead to being DoD ready, so to speak, for a follow-on validation assessment. And the expectation and cultures issues, again, we work pretty close with the FedRAMP team, and we're trying to harmonize our controls in conjunction with their controls to help speed up the assessment processes. These type of events, these seminars in which we have that opportunity to talk one-on-one with vendors when they ask particular questions about assessments, we help through education, help bridge that cultural gap of how we think, how we on the DoD side perceive and think about things, and how they on the industry side perceive and think about things. So we try to, through education, bridge that particular expectation and culture gap. On the streamline and authorization processes, we have implemented a couple of revisions to how we're doing things, not just on the FedRAMP side, but also on the DoD side. When at one time we was doing things in a serial manner, and it was taking like 8 to 10 months. Now we've got the processes sort of nailed down to approximately 12 weeks. That's 3 months. So we sort of cut that in half, and we're looking at other ways to reduce that authorization process to make it easier and quicker, so that folks, whenever they decide to do business with the government, they can come on and have some sort of idea of where they're going to meet their other commitments as they work toward their provision authorization process.
Okay, so about the only issue that I can address as to what we're doing now is from the aspect of the cloud computing SRG and the lack of supporting DoD policy for cloud. We're just in the process of feeling our way and learning about how to move into cloud. As others on the panel have said, you can't move everything into cloud. Moving to cloud is hard. It's not an easy process unless you're starting from scratch with something brand new. So I think the Cloud SRG today, in its latest release 3 of version 1, is capturing about as much as we've got today on our policy for moving to cloud. Eventually, DoD policy, which takes a long time to write and generate, will catch up someday once we figure out what we're doing for all kinds of clouds. And that's the other problem. There's just, we initially started out with the idea that we're going to move to infrastructure as a service, so our policy in the SRG was written towards that. But nobody wants infrastructure as a service. I can't say nobody wants, but a lot of people want software as a service instead of infrastructure. So we're trying to work in and learn, and there's so many different types of vendors and software as a service applications out there that it's going to be a moving target for some time.
So the Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide, the CCSRG, is, for lack of better words, it's our Bible, right?
Right.
And so it's fair to say that it's an evolving document as we work through moving more and more workload to cloud. We're kind of taking lessons learned and revamping the security documentation to match what's in the art of possible.
Exactly.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about problems. We've talked a little bit about what we're doing to address them in the near term. But this is where we kind of get the opportunity to dream a little bit, right? And so the question is, 5, 10 years from now, if we had a crystal ball, right, where do we see cloud and compute within the department going, and what will it take to get there, right? So let's start at the far end. What if you were king for the day?
I was king for the day.
What would you do?
Well, I don't know. To be honest. It's going to grow. We're going to learn lessons. We'll get there eventually. Will we be in the commercial cloud long term? Maybe. Maybe not. We don't know. A lot of people have moved to cloud. A lot of people have moved back from cloud in commercial industry. So we'll see where we get in 10 years with that.
Okay.
Virtualization is not cloud. We'll probably be totally virtualized, but virtualization is not cloud per se. So
Okay.
that's about what I can say.
Charlie?
I think what I foresee down the road actually is the whole assessment process. I think we're moving toward an automated type process, and I would say 5-10 years down the road, I think you'll be able to dial up just like we get a phone line or a telephone or a cell phone or a smartphone. You'll be able to dial up your processes, dial up your requirements, and it'll come out on the other end. I have a level 4 signed by the DOD, DISA director or the DISA provision authorization official. So I'm just joking, but I think automation is the key. I think if we could look at a way to automate a lot of these processes, I think that would go a long way forward in helping us clear up a lot of things like the culture gap, the how fast we can get something done type situation. It'll be a better way to get things done, to make things more convenient. So I'm looking at somebody to come in, and write the code to automate the entire assessment process.
Okay. So do you think it's a fair statement to say that we're not fast enough? We, DoD, are not fast enough to meet our mission partners' requirements?
So that's a trick question, but let me say it this way. We, DoD, our risk model is different than industry's risk model. It's a lot. We have a lot to lose if something is breached in a carrier battle group falls into the ocean, versus if someone's bank account is breached, right? So I don't think it's fair to say that. I think we just do things different, and it's part of that culture expectation issue that we somehow need to bridge, going forward with the cloud system.
So I'll say this. So in defense of Charlie, I use that claim a lot. It's called we have a nickname for it. It's called PDC, Patriotic Death Claim, right? And it's basically if something goes wrong, people die. That's that kind of mentality, right? So we look at risk a little differently because we're fearful for the war fighters' lives, right? And so one of our primary jobs is to make sure that at the end of the day, the war fighter has what they need to do their job, but we're also protecting them in every way that we can to ensure that they come home safely, right?
So I think I'm probably one of the most optimistic about cloud here. I would say if I can get my way, I would see in 5 to 10 years, majority of the DoD applications at level 4 and 5 operating from a cloud environment, whether that's on-prem or off-prem. So the reason why I say that is because I think there's going to be a cultural shift in the DoD. That now security in the cloud becomes a shared responsibility, right, between the DoD and the industry. And how do we get there? That's the key. I think in the next few years, we're going to have policy changes and process changes as well as technologies to enable us to verify and monitor the CSPs in a way that we can trust them to do part of the security responsibilities that we want them to do. So number 2 would be, I think technology changes so fast. There's innovations every day, right? So in that sense, whatever technical difficulties we see today, I have full confidence that they will be resolved in the near future. And from an SCCA perspective, it is definitely our goal to utilize whatever technology out there possible to help us make security better instead of reinventing the wheels. right? So number 3 would be cost. So I think cost for cloud is going to continue to go down from a hosting perspective as well as security services perspective. So a lot of the CSPs out there has already implemented or are providing security services as part of their native offering without additional cost to the to the mission owners. And on top of that, with the innovation of technology, I see the security services cost will go down as well. So all in all, that would encourage our mission owners to move more and more applications to the cloud, if not their entire data centers.
So I like to make the argument, 5 years ago, cost was the reason why cloud even got in the room, right? So cost was the reason why we started having those discussions, right? It was all about, if you move to cloud, it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be cheaper to operate, cheaper to run. And so that was how cloud kind of got its foot in the door. But what I've heard across the department in the last year or two has really been a shift from that. It's not so much about cost anymore. It's really about the other tangible benefits you get from a cloud environment, right? So number one is, and this flies in the face of traditional DoD thought, right, is you get a more secure capability, right? And number two, you get a more resilient capability, more elasticity, more resiliency. It's the whole question of, where is my cloud data or my cloud application running? And the simple answer from the cloud providers is, why do you care, right? And so, I think more and more the mission partners are having that discussion now about the resiliency and the security aspects of cloud. And honestly, cost, I hate to say it, cost has become like a third wheel as part of that discussion. It's really become less and less important in the major discussion as much as what the other aspects of cloud that we're going to get. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
All right. Dave?
So I'm going to disagree with that a little bit.
Dave's going to disagree.
That's okay. Quantum computing is going to fix all this, and we won't be having the same discussion in 10 years. No, I don't actually believe that either. No, so cost is always going to be a driver, but it's going to be more of a entry requirement than it is a differentiator that it is today, right? So, given the way the political winds are going today, and with no sign of letting up on reducing the budgets that we have available us to do any of this stuff. And frankly, the real problem is that we can't compete with industry on a intellectual capital and capital basis. When I have Microsoft, who has 20,000 engineers working on Azure, okay, and I have Apple running around with $40 billion in excess cash trying to figure out what they're doing with it. I'm sorry, I was off. Microsoft has $40 billion cash floating around to do this. Apple only has $120 billion lying around, burning a hole in their pockets. We in the DoD can no longer compete with those kinds of resources. If you look at, so Microsoft has $40 billion lying around. The entire DoD budget was almost $700 billion. That's a pretty significant chunk of change compared to the entire DoD budget. The cyber budget for last year was about $35 billion for DoD. Okay, so Microsoft has $40 billion lying around. DoD spending $35 billion on cyber and computing total. You can do the math. I think what we're going to end up focusing more on moving the applications out to the commercial area because we're not going to be able to compete with that kind of resourcing. But we have to focus more on what's happening to the data, who's accessing the data, where's the data going, how's it being used, and having the data itself be able to sort of track itself. So if a bad guy comes in, an adversary comes in and takes some data, that data ought to know that it's where it's going, so it can phone home and say, hey, somebody took me and I'm in some place I'm not supposed to be. That sort of, shifting the focus from our current network basis and our current endpoint basis to the people and the data basis I think in 10 years, 5 to 10 years is really going to change the discussion. And it will change the way we think about it to the point where I may have the case where most of the stuff in the unclassified world, DoD is not going to do that anymore. They're going to outsource that to the commercial world. You know, for most of the unclassified stuff, if banks can do it and the medical community can do it, we ought to be able to do it too. Now, there's a few things. Okay, PDC still applies in some cases, but we're going to have to pick and choose which of those cases to really apply it to. Classified stuff, got it. Okay, end of the world scenarios, got it. We got to be able to plan for that. We got to be able to resource for that, but we can't resource to protect everything. We just don't have the resources to do it. And so, in the next 5 years, we're going to have to spend some time really focusing on what is it we're really going to spend our resources on protecting internally, organically, intrinsically, and which of that stuff are we just going to contract it out and say, okay, you guys with appropriate oversight, with appropriate reviews, FedRAMP, for instance, you guys take care of this piece of it. Tell me how it's going. Give me the information I need. Give me the information so I can tie it to the things I'm seeing in the super double top secret areas that I'm looking at. But beyond that, you guys take care of it for me and make sure nothing bad happens, because then I'm going to take you in court and I'm going to have to charge you for your mistake. That's where I see things going.
Okay, excellent. All right, so with that was all of the kind of canned questions I had for the panel. So at this point, we'll open it up for the audience. If there are any particular questions you guys want to ask or any particular areas you want us to go, we'll take that. So,
how y'all doing this morning? Quick question. I've heard a lot here today about automation being a key to where we want to go with cloud. And of course, it's a key with everything, right? There's been a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence, for example, in many different fields, whether it's documentation, implementation, or wherever. What role do you see artificial intelligence taking in the resolution of the problems and in the vision areas?
So where do we see AI as far as playing an aspect in what we've talked about? So we don't have, so one of the parts of the panel one of the parts that's not up on the panel is actually our back-end data analytics side, right? And that's where I will tell you there's been a lot of discussion specifically around AI in the back-end analytics side, right? So after we gather the data about what's going on, using AI to actually do that analytics to find the needle in the haystack, for lack of a better word, or the insider threat, or that kind of information, but using AI to do that, machine learning kind of AI technology to really do that analysis of that large data mine in the back end. I will tell you that's one key area of focus that DISA is focusing on right now, and I think there's some discussions at this conference about it in another session. So,
let me address that real quick, because it's absolutely vital that we have the ability to analyze the volumes and volumes of data that come in, either from a performance standpoint or a security standpoint, right? And we can't just buy an automation tool out of the box and say, okay, now go do great things, especially at today's levels of technologies. And I see the velocity of both the security and performance data only increasing. And that means that there's got to be some machine learning, some artificial intelligence, some way for the system to understand what's going on and then bring the human in the loop when there's a real problem that it can't solve, and otherwise automate as much of the things that the countermeasures that happen, the recognition, the ability to recognize adverse activity, either from a performance or security standpoint, at the kinds of speeds and the kind of velocity rate, the data velocities that we're seeing. I can't possibly do it without that.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, I think as we talk about, the Internet of Things, as much as it applies to the department, where the number of sensors is just skyrocketing, and the sheer volume of data that we're having to deal with is astronomical. And so I will tell you that from a back-end perspective, I think a lot of the teams look at machine learning and AI as a way to get out of that, hopefully get out of that tidal wave that we see coming. And so
every device is essentially a sensor. Okay, it's a multi-level sensor. Okay, so I don't need to add necessarily more devices. I need to be able to understand, ingest all of that data coming from our phones, our laptops, our servers, our routers, all that other stuff that's coming in, and most of it these days is ending up on the floor because nobody can do anything with it. Instead, we add these extra devices. But what I really need to do is take all that information, and it turns out to be petabytes of data over the course of a short period of time, and be able to churn through, have the AI churn through that, and then tell me what's going on, rather than me trying to query this mountain of data and try and figure out what's going on. As John said, finding the needle in the haystack.
So is it from a panel perspective, is it fair to say that we view automation as a way to increase speed to market? I mean, are we looking at automation? There's two facets, right? You could look at it as a way to lower cost, but you can also look at it as a way to increase speed to market, relevancy to our mission partners, right? How do we decrease the time it takes to do something through automation so we can bring capability to the warfighter faster?
So let me add my 2 cents worth there, John. I think that and piggyback off of Dave's and the guest's comment on automation and AI. I think it would do both. And I think from the perspective of automation and AI, with some of the new technology that we're moving into, such as software-defined networking, I think there'll come a time where using AI and automation that we'll be able to, if your network is breached, that network would be able to metamorph itself in the breach and just switch to a different network. In other words, it would change its operating mechanism and move elsewhere, so that the breach wouldn't really impact on it. And I was digging into some of the technology magazines, and there was a big discussion about that as we move out into the near future.
Self-healing
how
networks.
Automation and AI will work together.
Yeah. Self-healing networks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next question. You got to crouch.
Well, I notice the microphones are tough unless you're close to them. Thanks.
He's height challenged. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Hale, for pulling this panel together. Very informative. Dave, Susan, Charlie, and Ron. I like to format the kind of the problem solution. Kind of note that most of the discussion is about the supply signal, hosting CSPs and getting CSPs on board, and security for your mission partners' services to onboard. I mean, I kind of get that right from your perspective. So then, with that thought, I'd ask you, what are the other challenges? And there's some that we've heard from mission partners, such as they lack a methodology for migrating, a common methodology, a framework they could use for migrating legacy applications. That's the biggest push, is migrating legacy apps. They can't do cost estimating for the 300s to create the RFP. A couple times they've tried, even small apps migrating costs $3 to $4 million a piece. Yeah. Cost prohibitive. Contracting is not set up for cloud, right? The idea of dimming up and dimming down, and almost like a utility. What if it starts costing more towards the end of the year and you don't have the funds? It violates FARs, but you can't treat it like water and electricity because it's not regulated. So there's a whole lot of other issues. There's issues of incumbents not wanting to see their systems go to cloud because they lose the revenue on the contractor side. So a whole host. Who in DoD is working these issues? Is DISA part of it? DoD CIO, I'm aware of the council, but not really articulation and progress. And so with that as a framework, what are the other challenges that I haven't listed and you haven't listed? Is there anyone working them? And how can either AFCEA or industry help on these, realizing a lot of them are not technical?
Yeah. So somebody on the panel mentioned migration. I don't know if that was Ron. Okay. So the question about migration came up, and the statement was made. If you're building a new application from scratch, moving to commercial cloud is really straightforward, right? It's the whole, how do you take an application, for lack of a better word, that was architected in the 70s, coded in the 80s, and then recoded again in the 90s or early 2000s, and move that type of architecture to a cloud model. And the department has struggled mightily with that. I mean, we struggled mightily moving that to a virtualized world, let alone just a cloud model, right? And so I don't think there's a silver bullet on how to fix that, other than we need money to modernize the applications or completely rip and replace with applications designed and built in the cloud model, right? I don't know of any magic bucket of money falling from the sky from a DoD perspective, so I don't know if that's going to actually happen. I think a lot of what we'll see is that stuff will naturally, through natural attrition, phase out, right? They will simply, as new demand comes online, those applications will be built in the cloud model and be cloud native. And over time, those legacy applications will just simply fade away and die off.
So there's a lot of interesting things you brought up, things like FAR requirements, acquisition processes and things like that, which I don't know that we're necessarily qualified to talk. I know DoD CIO has got a separate effort working a lot of that. A lot of it fundamentally ends up bringing into question some of the things that the current policies require. For instance, how do I use as a software as a service cloud provider in an acquisition process that requires me to have fair and open competition on a routine basis, right? Moving data between SaaS provider costs more than the amount of money that it takes me to bring that service provider on board. So that's, and I will tell you that's not unique to DoD. A lot of those kinds of issues are also industry issues. If I go in a contract with Salesforce for CRM, now I decide, okay, now how do I have a free and open competition for Salesforce? Well, I can't do that. I end up basically having a free and open competition between value-added resellers who all use Salesforce. Okay, I don't know how that fits with the... So some of this has to go even all the way up to Congress and things like that, when they have to reevaluate some of the ways they're thinking about this and the requirements they've even put on DoD. And I know DoD CIO is working some of that stuff. And
so to piggyback on that, DoD and GSA and some other federal organizations, FHA and a couple others and DHS are kind of locked at the hip, working on changes specifically to the acquisition policies government-wide and how we deal with acquiring cloud compute. So that we're kind of tag teaming with GSA on their Cloud Cafe effort, which is really about streamlining cloud compute purchasing for the federal government. And so attacking the FAR clause happens to be one of those. And so if we can get the FAR clause changes in there, then we can look at the DFAR, how the DoD implements that. So I think there's progress there. Unfortunately, when you start talking about policy, nothing moves fast. And so...
Talk about glacial progress.
Right. Mr. Orndorff.
All right, good. Well, first, I wanted to commend you guys for taking on hard problems and blazing a path forward in an area that's going to benefit DoD and bring a lot of good industry innovations to the department. So congratulations and thanks for the hard work that you're doing. question. There's been a lot of talk about innovation, and there were some comments yesterday in panels about processes and governance and policies that essentially inhibit the pace of innovation. I know you've talked already about some things that you're doing to address that. From a innovation over time perspective, do you see some things that industry needs to do or government needs to do as an industry-government partnership to make sure that we're able to introduce innovation at the pace that the commercial cloud providers are doing outside of the government cloud and the government service offerings? In other words, as you know, I think one of the big benefits, like John mentioned, is that the cloud brings some innovation at a pace different from what we're used to. Do we have the processes in place so that once you get that first authorization, you're still going to be able to introduce and keep up with all the innovation opportunities that industry can bring to the table? I hope that question makes sense to you.
Well, from the aspect of policy, the rules and regulations have to be more, changed, right? We have to be more cloud friendly. Funding needs to be available to support innovation. The migration to cloud has typically been, go to cloud, you're going to save money, but you don't get any money to go there, right? So,
are you saying you have to spend money to make money?
Somewhat, yeah, a little bit. This is what makes moving to cloud hard, right? As I said earlier. Innovation will come. We have to embrace it. Other than that, we have to be careful of spending the taxpayer dollars, too.
So one of the problems we have, especially in the government, is because, as we talked about, changing policy is glacial. Generally, when policy gets done, it represents the thinking from 2 to 4 years prior to the period of when the policy is actually signed out, just to get through the process and all the hoops of people signing off on it. And not to mention the part where you got to educate everybody who's in the sign-off on what it is you're really trying to do. I think one of the ways the industry can help in that sort of policy aspect is bringing some of the things that industry has done to streamline the change cycle into the policy cycle. So instead of having policies that are directive in nature, talking about you must have this, and you must have this, and you must have this, the policy directs things like having governance structures that then the governance structures own the change over time and can better streamline it that way. I think a lot of this turns into how do you streamline the process, the policy enforcement, and make the policy flexible enough that it can change in an 18-month technology life cycle, for instance. If I've got a policy that's at least 2 years old, it's already at least one technology life cycle behind. And bringing those things to bear that allow us to make the policy reflect the outcomes and understand the outcomes necessarily rather than being prescriptive, and how do you make the policy itself flexible enough to allow the changes. One of the things I did not mention earlier, and this is, we talk about the rate of change increasing, right? So you've got, the old way we did business of doing accreditations and authorizations and long paperwork. Well, when I start getting into DevOps kinds of environments, right, and you look at like Microsoft Visual Studio that you get on Azure is actually a DevOps product, right? They actually DevOps on the platform as it's progressing. So they make changes on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis, and you get all the benefits. Okay, so looking at things like risk management framework and stuff like that, how do you then allow the ability to do rapid changes, right? Go from a change every 6 months to 20 changes a day, and still understand the risk, still understand what you're getting out of it, and have the policy and the governance associated with it structured so that it allows that kind of rapid evolution. And even in the case of some of the cloud things we've been talking about, where that cloud, this software-defined infrastructures and things, those kinds of changes are allowed within the structure rather than having I changed a 0 to a 1, now I have to go through another 6-month change process, because that's what the policy says. And really bringing some of that key to how do you succeed and still be flexible into the government policy arena.
So a couple of discussions on policy. From a technology standpoint, I'll say this. So the Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide and the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture Functional Requirements document are public documents on the ISE website, right? And so those documents were built openly. They were built a lot with industry's input. And where we would want the commercial industry to go is to close the gap between what they have organically provided in the past and what we say we need from a security standpoint, right? So if instead of us having to, for lack of a better word, having to build bolt-on capabilities to fill that gap, if the commercial providers can fill that gap with their capabilities out of the box, then the gap that we have to fill is ultimately smaller and therefore more efficient and faster to market, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think most of our goals are to break down the barriers so that our mission partners can leverage cloud provider type capabilities, right? And so anything we can do to expedite that is key. So, all right. I believe we are out of time. So I do want to thank everybody from the panel, and I do want to close with a couple of comments. So first off, for those who have not heard Dave speak before, he's a rock star today. He's got this panel, he's got another panel, and he actually has his own session later on today. So check your agenda and come hound him in every session you can. He is a wealth of knowledge. The rest of us, we will be around the conference, and we'll be in the DISA booth a couple of times throughout the day. So please stop by if you have any further follow-on questions that we didn't necessarily talk about in the session. And I do want to close with one thing. There's kind of a 800-pound gorilla in the room that we didn't really talk about. So MilCloud 2.0, for everybody's edification, the contract was awarded last Friday. And so we're proceeding with bringing a commercial provider in-house to provide those cloud capabilities from within DoD data centers. So that's a big win from the department's perspective. So with that said, thanks everybody for your time, and thanks for joining us.